West Texas takes up nearly 40% of the state's land, but holds less than 10% of its people. That's a whole lot of space with hardly anyone in it. The United States is one of the biggest countries in the world. But if you look closely, you'll notice something strange. Most of its people live in the eastern half. Out west, the land stretches farther, the towns get smaller, and the people grow fewer. Only 1 out of every 5 Americans lives in the western half of the country. And nowhere is that divide more obvious than right here in Texas. If you draw a line from Vernon down to Laredo, only about 10% of Texans live west of it. That's right, for every 10 people in Texas, only 1 lives in the west. It makes sense in a way. The big cities, Dallas, Houston, Austin, San Antonio, they're all to the east. Out west, just one big city stands alone, El Paso. But why is that? Why is almost half the land so empty? To understand, we have to go deeper into the geography, the weather, the history, and the way of life. Because West Texas isn't just empty, it's a story. A story of hard land, tough choices, and why people settle where they do or don't. Geography. There's no official line that marks where West Texas begins. Even geographers don't fully agree. But the Texas Comptroller gives us a working definition. 30 counties stretching from Mason and Brady all the way to the Rio Grande near Dryden and up north to Seminole. This area covers more than 39,700 square miles. Yet it's far from uniform. It's split into several distinct physiographic zones. The Trans-Pecos region, west of the Pecos River, is the driest part of Texas and sits inside the Chihuahuan Desert. It holds the state's only mountain ranges, including the Guadalupe Mountains, which rise to 8,749 feet, the highest point in Texas. Over the last 120 years, overgrazing, fire suppression, and frequent droughts have turned much of this land into dry, bare ground. To the east lies the Llano Estacado, a flat, high plain that reaches into New Mexico and offers little natural surface water. Further east are the Rolling Plains and the Edwards Plateau, rugged zones with red soils, deep caves, and a vital underground water source called the Edwards Aquifer. Because each of these zones has its own extreme landscape, planning roads, water systems, and towns becomes a complex, costly task, and that's a major reason why people have settled here slowly and in small numbers. Harsh climate. West Texas isn't just dry, it's one of the driest places in the entire state. Some parts, like El Paso and Big Bend, get less than 10 inches of rain a year. That's less than some deserts around the world. But the real issue isn't just low rainfall, it's that more water evaporates than falls, meaning the land is constantly losing moisture. In far west Texas, evaporation can top 90 inches a year, which makes rivers, lakes, and even soil dry up fast. That makes farming tough, and ranching even tougher, unless heavy irrigation is used. And that puts more strain on the little water the region has. Then there's the heat. Summer temperatures can soar over 100 degrees, while winter nights can drop below freezing, especially in the mountains. On top of that, wind moves freely across the open plains, kicking up thick dust, sometimes turning the sky orange for miles. This wind and dryness helped fuel the Dust Bowl of the 1930s, when millions of acres of topsoil simply blew away, devastating farms across Texas and the Great Plains. Even today, dust storms are common, and the land remains just as dry, making it tough for communities to grow and even tougher for new ones to begin. Limited surface water. And if the dry air and hot winds weren't tough enough, there's another problem. Water on the surface is hard to find. Most big cities around the world grow near rivers, lakes, or the sea because people need water to live, farm, and build. But in West Texas, there are hardly any major rivers that flow all year. The Rio Grande, the biggest one in the region, sometimes shrinks down to a trickle, and in some places it even dries up completely. Why? Because cities upstream like El Paso and Juarez pull out so much water for drinking and farming that there's barely anything left by the time it gets farther downstream. Even the big reservoirs, places like Falcon and Amistad, are alarmingly low. Right now, they're less than a third full, and some are barely holding 15% of what they should. That means towns can't count on rivers or lakes to grow. There simply isn't enough water to support more people or new industries. So they turn to groundwater, pulling from deep underground, but even that is running out, especially in the southern part of the Ogallala Aquifer. In the end, when water is this scarce and uncertain, it's just not easy to build a city. plant a farm, or start a life, and that's a big reason so few people live in West Texas. Groundwater crisis. With so little surface water, people in West Texas rely on something they can't even see: groundwater. The Ogallala Aquifer, stretching beneath the high plains, is the largest in the U.S., and it supplies more than half the water used across Texas. But here's the problem: we're using it up way faster than it can refill. In most places, the Ogallala only recharges by about 1 inch a year, and some experts say that if we keep pumping like this, more than half of it could be gone by 2070. Even worse, if it runs dry completely, it could take thousands of years to come back. One reason this is happening is an old Texas law called the rule of capture. If you own the land, you can pump as much water as you want, with almost no limits. That means everyone's pulling water, but no one's really in charge of how much is too much. Smaller aquifers like the West Texas Bolsons are shrinking too. They support ranches and towns in places like Presidio and Van Horn. But their wells don't produce much, and levels have been dropping since the 1950s. With no strong system to protect the groundwater and more people depending on it every year, the land is heading toward a slow-moving water crisis, and that makes it risky for new families, farms, or businesses to settle in West Texas. Irrigation challenges. In West Texas, farming can't survive without irrigation, and irrigation uses more water than anything else in the state. Most of that water comes from underground sources like the Ogallala and Edwards Trinity aquifers, which are already running low. Because the land is so dry, farmers rely on irrigation just to keep crops alive. But a lot of that water is wasted. Old methods like flood irrigation are still common because they're cheap to install, even though they use much more water than needed. Some cities, like Lubbock, have started setting strict watering rules, only allowing irrigation during cooler parts of the day to stop water from evaporating too fast. There are newer tools like drip systems and smart sensors that can save water, but switching over takes money and time. The bigger problem is that farms and towns are now in direct competition for the same shrinking water supply. As more people move to Texas, experts say city water demand could soon pass farming, and that puts real pressure on rural areas that depend on crops and cattle to survive. In West Texas, where water is already scarce, this growing competition makes it hard for new towns to grow without cutting into the farms, and hard for farms to survive if more people move in. History. To understand why so few people live in West Texas today, we have to look back, way back. This land has always been tough to tame. It's dry, rugged, far from coasts, and full of natural barriers like deserts, plains, and plateaus. Before it became part of the U.S., it belonged to Spain, then Mexico, and most of it remained empty because it was just so hard to live here. Even after Texas joined the United States in 1845, settlers had to battle the land itself, and often the Comanche and Apache who fiercely resisted westward expansion. The U.S. Army built forts to protect new settlers, but farming was difficult, and towns were few and far between. Later, ranching and oil brought bursts of growth, but they didn't last. Most people came for short-term jobs, then moved on when the boom ended. Even today, this cycle continues. Oil booms in cities like Midland bring people in fast, but once the work dries up, so do the towns. Meanwhile, West Texas holds a strong conservative and rural culture, which some people love, but others might avoid if they're looking for a more diverse or urban lifestyle. So between the harsh history, tough land, and tight-knit culture, West Texas has always been a place where only a few stay. Primary industries. If there's one thing that has brought people to West Texas, it's oil. The Permian Basin, one of the richest oil fields in the world, pumps out nearly half of America's crude oil, and towns like Midland and Odessa grew up around it. Sometimes oil can turn a tiny town into a busy city almost overnight, like Kermit, Texas, where the population exploded in the 1930s after oil was discovered nearby. But oil is a risky business. Prices crash, wells dry up, and just as fast as people came, they leave. That's what happened in Wink, once home to over 6,000 people during the oil boom. Now fewer than 800 remain. This cycle, called boom and bust, makes it hard to build stable communities or long-term growth. Farming and ranching also play a big part in West Texas. Cotton, cattle, corn. But those jobs depend on land and water, which are always in short supply. So when the economy is built mostly on oil and agriculture, There just aren't many options for people looking for something different, and that keeps the population small and the region specialized. The land is big, but it's not for building. West Texas may look wide open, but most of that land is already being used, just not for towns or neighborhoods. Over 80% of Texas is privately owned, and much of West Texas is covered in massive farms and ranches. Most of that land is pasture-wide, dry stretches where cattle graze or cotton is grown, not places set up for homes, schools, or stores. Even though the average farm in the region is over 500 acres, a lot of the land belongs to just a few big operations. Smaller farms make up the majority of owners, but they hold only a tiny fraction of the land. Across the rest of Texas, land is being sold off for new housing and businesses, especially around big cities. But in West Texas, that pressure to build just isn't the same. There aren't enough people moving in to spark that kind of development. And even if demand did grow, much of the land just isn't suited for city life. It's remote, rugged, and still tied to old patterns of ranching and agriculture. So, while it may seem like there's room to grow, the truth is, the land is already spoken for, and it's not easy to change that. Distance, isolation, and modern life. Even with oil, ranches, and open skies, living in West Texas isn't easy for most people. It's just far from big cities, from hospitals, from airports, even from grocery stores. Driving from Midland to El Paso or Dallas can take 5 hours or more. And there aren't many flight options unless you live near a large regional hub. For many families, that kind of distance makes daily life harder, whether it's a doctor's appointment or just getting supplies. And while the land doesn't support crops well, you can still raise cattle if you own enough of it. But life here means dealing with blowing dust, strong winds, and poor air quality that can be tough on your health. That doesn't mean the region has nothing. Places like Carson County host major facilities like the Pantex plant, part of the U.S. nuclear defense system. And the skies? They're some of the clearest in the country with little light pollution. You can see stars that city folks never get to. Still, for most people today, West Texas is a land of quiet beauty, but also distance, dust, and deep isolation that keeps population low. Some growth, but not everywhere. West Texas may be big, but it's still the least crowded part of the state, with just 16 people per square mile compared to 108 statewide. Between 2012 and 2022, the region added about 43,000 people, which sounds like growth until you see that's less than half the pace of the rest of Texas. And here's the catch. Almost all that growth happened in just a few cities like Midland, Odessa, and San Angelo. Meanwhile, the small towns and rural counties are shrinking fast. Places like Loving County lost over 40% of their population in just 10 years. So what's really happening? People aren't flooding into West Texas. They're just moving from the countryside into the nearest city. And when the oil jobs dry up, even those cities see people leave. With a population that shifts with the economy, it's hard to build schools, clinics, or the kind of lasting communities that keep people rooted. That's why across most of this massive region, the land stays quiet, the roads stay empty, and the population stays small. So in the end, West Texas isn't empty by accident. It's shaped by deep, overlapping forces, harsh climate, scarce water, rugged land, fragile infrastructure, and a boom and bust economy. Even today, these challenges continue to shape who stays, who leaves, and why. Some counties are shrinking. Some towns grow fast, then fade. But through it all, West Texas remains. Wide, dry, quiet, and tough. Not everyone wants to live here. But for those who do, it's not just about jobs or comfort, it's about a connection to the land and a way of life that refuses to change. It's a place where silence stretches farther than the roads, and the sky feels bigger than the future. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive, hit subscribe. We've got more untold stories of America's hidden corners coming soon. See you in the next one.